Hey, Wrecker.
Nick, where are you? You're in a different location and it's not a virtual screen.
This is my beautiful hotel room in California. So
Well, they don't have paintings or anything that you could put on the wall. There's nothing
there's a
there.
painting back there.
Oh
I
yeah, it
don't
is.
know.
It has blurred lines on it.
Yeah, no, we take our MBAs out here to California to work with companies. But hey, Wrecker. So speaking of MBAs, what is the hottest topic in every single company, in every single IT person you talk about in industry? What's the one topic they all care about?
It's very simple. That's ChatGPT, baby. Every single
ChatGPT.
firm I talk to these days, I talk a lot to firms. They all do something about it. Like some of them worry, some of them explore, some of them have task forces, whatever. But in some shape or other, they're all dealing with ChatGPT. Every single one of them. Doesn't matter what industry it is.
Yeah, and here at Notre Dame, right, we have this task force how to deal with it in higher ed. I'm sure your university has that as well, or something.
Something like that, yeah. But you know who doesn't deal with it? I
Hmm.
don't. Like I've used it twice, three times, three times. I wanted to create three screenshots for lectures I was giving. So I used it exactly three times. One time I was asking who's Jan Recker, and it told some partially correct and some bullshit. It hallucinated, I think is the term. And then I
Hmm.
asked it about its sustainability, its carbon footprint, and I actually tried to dig deep and say, like, can you calculate the whatever. And it couldn't do that. So that's the second time. And the third time, I can't even remember. That's it. I used it for a total of 10 minutes. I'm a slow adopter of these things.
That's funny. So I remember, so I asked it, who is Nick Parenti? And it
Yeah.
knew, it said something. But then when I said, who is Nicholas Parenti? It's like, I don't know who this is. So it's, so
No,
that's
when
one of
I
the
asked
issues.
it, well, it was okay. Like it gave, it's part of the Wikipedia page or something. Like, he's a professor at University of Hamburg. And then it said, Jan Recker won the Young Scholar Service Award or something, one of the awards that actually do exist, like an early career award from AIS or
Hmm.
Informs, but I never
Yeah.
did. And so I never did. So I was like, well, that's not actually true. Like, Jan Recker never won this award. And then it started complaining that I would give false information. I was like, what the hell are you doing? And then I just, stopped it.
All right. I just asked it, who is Jan Recker? Jan Recker is a well-known academic in the field of information systems. At my last knowledge update, September 2021, that's because ChatGPT stopped training and then
Yeah.
3.5, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, he's a professor of information systems at the University of Cologne in Germany. He made significant
Wrong.
contributions to the field of information systems. Well, we know that's
Probably
a
also
hallucination.
wrong.
Particularly in areas related to business process management, business process modeling, information systems design. Well, I guess the design part, right? Do you design anything ever?
I've designed plenty of studies.
Yeah. Jan Recker's work often revolves around the application of information technology to improve business processes, enhance. Yeah, this is fine. It's digital transformation, so it's just words, right?
Yeah.
But that's half of what academia is. It's just words too. So yeah. All right. So this ChatGPT, these LLMs. So what people are using them in academia, and
Yeah.
Anjana Susarla and colleagues, so Ram Gopal, Jason Thatcher, and Supratik all got together for this ISR, and they have this editorial, which I think is kind of cool. So I read it. You
Yeah.
sent it to me,
Yeah.
so I read it.
And we want to talk about this today.
Yeah, let's just talk about it a little bit. They give these stages. Well, what I did, so let me just tell you what I did, because this is what everyone does, right? And we do this I did this with my executives. You do this, you just play with the tool and discuss it while you're playing with it, right? So the thing that I said is write a 7 paragraph article on how to use ChatGPT in academic research. And I'm sure
Did
they
you?
did this. We should ask them. And I get they didn't say it in the article that I could tell that, what would it look like. But when I asked ChatGPT to make an article, uh, it basically said, well, what are it starts off understanding ChatGPT, which is what they did. There's an introduction, then there's understanding. Then it's like the benefits of using ChatGPT, and they talked about literature review, data analysis, proofreading, a lot of the things they had. And then, they had best practices and then potential pitfalls. Now, their potential pitfalls that ChatGPT gave me weren't probably as thoughtful. Well, none of the stuff was as thoughtful as the article, but it's kind of funny that in a quick essay, it pretty much writes a similar article to the one that, four prominent academics
Well, yeah, that's one
wrote.
way to put it. But let me preface it this way. So we want to talk about ChatGPT not as an object of study. We can do this separately, I guess, but we want to talk about its impact on the academic enterprise. And
Right.
and this has been going on as well. Just as firms have, all now dealing with it in some task force or innovation project or wherever. So have academics, right? We had a board meeting at the quarterly about discussing with every single editor about how we should deal with ChatGPT generated text or ChatGPT generated reviews. Like generally, what's the policy here?
Yeah.
When I was at the German IS conference a couple of weeks ago, we happened to talk about it, of course. And then someone came up and said, "Well, I'm using it for writing." I said, "Oh, do you really?" Because I said, like, I'm not, I'm a slow adopter of technology in general. Like, I haven't really used it. And then literally everybody agreed. It's like, "Oh yeah." So
Oh yeah, what? They agreed
oh
that
yeah,
you
they're
could use
all
it for.
using it to improve their writing. And they all said the same argument. They said, "Look, I'm a German. I'm a non-native English speaker. It's actually really helpful for editing my writing." And I was a little bit astonished by the volume. Like everyone just nodded their head and said, "Yeah, I'm doing this too. I'm doing this too." So that's a thing. And then I
So what do
recently,
they do? They write it in English to the best they can in their German English, right? And then they put it in the system,
yeah, something like
and
that.
then it edits the paragraph to
Well,
make it
in two
better.
ways, right? One of them is the let ChatGPT generate the first draft, and then you start manually revising it, or the other way around. I've written something, please make it beautiful, or please make it shorter, or please make it anything really. But
Hmm.
a lot of them actually said, "Yeah, I'm using it already," because they all, you're native speaker. Maybe you don't get this, but as a non-native speaker, that's the thing, right? I like even after 20 years and only ever writing in English, I still get these comments like, "Oh, please have this proofread and please consult a native speaker, blah blah blah." So that is actually a thing that you encounter, and I
Yeah.
guess that a lot of people are very sensitive to their abilities or perceived lack of abilities in writing beautifully, and we all know how writing is important. So anyway, so the point of my story here was that I was a bit surprised that was in a couple of months ago. So I was surprised how quick that uptake already was. Because I don't think I've seen a ChatGPT generated text as yet. But then again, how would I know? I don't know.
So there are two things that are happening here. One is I wrote text and I'm asking ChatGPT to make it better because, say, I'm Japanese and I
Yeah.
don't write English well or I'm not confident. So I put my best English that I can into the into ChatGPT and say, please make this sound better. I don't know. So let's just start with that one right there. Is there a problem with that? I don't think there is.
I don't think there is either. In a
It's
way,
like
that's the
using an
same.
editor.
Exactly. It's the same as using an editor. It's the same as using Grammarly or my favorite Hemingway, your writing.com or something.
Yeah,
There's these web
yeah.
pages and they're actually pretty good. Like they highlight things that that are too verbose, too unclear, too grammatically, complex, whatever. Like, we Germans, we have a tendency to write very, very long concatenated sentences.
Yeah, long words. You
Yeah,
shove a
yeah.
bunch of words together to
Well,
create your own one
exactly,
big
right?
word.
So, and that transforming that into sort of Hemingway English, like short, direct, oof, it rains, he dies.
Well, you've mentioned this Hemingway My Text before. That's
Yeah,
some website you can go to
yeah,
shorten. Academics need this, especially qualitative
yeah,
researchers.
exactly. And I use that like occasionally.
And then passive voice is another thing. People just use passive voice a lot. And it's like, make it active voice, make it right. So I think ChatGPT can do that. It's like an editor. I don't see a problem with that. How about generating the paragraph, saying, listen, I want to write, here are three articles. You could feed it those three articles and you could say, give me a couple paragraph summary of these three articles or something. Is that, and then you use that as the starting point in your lit review. Is there a
Well, let's
problem with
let's be a
that?
little bit disciplined. I mean, like we're jumping things. So here's what we want to do. Like,
Hmm.
the beautiful thing about this Susala paper is they have this really simple, nice stage model of the academic process from idea generation to designing, study, data collection, analysis, and then writing, right? And then they
Yeah.
talk about the challenges and benefits of ChatGPT. And we thought we could do something like that as well. So let's start at the beginning with
You want to
with
go over
idea
each
generation.
section?
Yeah, let's do that.
So the first section is they say use generative AI in problem formulation and research design.
Yeah,
And in the article, they basically point out that yes, you can use it,
yeah,
but it's pretty generic, right? It's going to be weak. The research design is technically correct, but very
Not
limited in its
inventive.
view of
Yeah,
good
not original.
research. And not only that, but they give the example of mixed methods. So let's talk about research design maybe first. They use the idea of mixed methods, and they say, look, it's like qualitative and quantitative, but you can have mixed methods a variety of ways. You can reverse the order of qual quant. You can have mixed methods with two different qualitative cases, stuff like that. So I guess the research design, if you're a trained academic, are you getting any value out of ChatGPT?
Well, my answer to that would be no. Like it's a I think that science, they're saying science is new ideas in old formats. So, the phenomena change, the ideas change, of course, they should. But research designs tend to be very stable. I mean, a good experiment is a good experiment is a good experiment, right? And, psychometrics haven't really changed all that much. And a case study, there's blueprints, basically. And yes, there are inventions to procedures and to research designs. And I would put your computational intensive and some of the mixed method stuff there as well. It is not really known how you deal with, let's say, an experiment with expert interviews with trace data or something. I get that, but by and large, research design tend to be very stable. So if you read a couple of good textbooks, you should be set, right? I mean, then
Yeah,
I don't think that ChatGPT will give you a very original research design. And I
yeah,
see the danger that it gives you a poor man's version of research design advice. And I think that's the point that they were making as well, right? So that it tells you one way of doing mixed method, but it completely overlooks others. So in case I'd say using it for that purpose could bring more harm than good, if that makes sense.
well, I think it's beginner knowledge.
Yeah.
They Flivberg has this with a lot of he's Flivberg, the Bent Flivberg, the guy who wrote I'll give you, we can put his book in the show notes, but what he basically says,
It's a qualitative guy, right?
yeah,
Flivberg? Yeah.
yeah, he studies mega projects and some other things, but he basically said that quantitative theoretical knowledge and management is beginner knowledge, right? If you have whatever ease of use and perceived usefulness drives acceptance or something like that, just simplistic, probabilistic statements, he's like, that's beginner knowledge. That's how, as a manager, you start. Someone coming into a field can look at that and be like, okay, I have a place to start. He said it's not expert knowledge. Expert knowledge requires, a lot of exposure to case after case after case. And I guess it's the same with research design. ChatGPT will give you beginner knowledge. It'll tell you how to do an experiment and make sure you're checking all the boxes for a good experiment. But you're not to do a good experiment. You have to do it, and there are judgment calls all throughout about what
They
constitutes a
are.
good
Yeah.
manipulation check, what constitutes and there's a feel for it that people get that we're not going to get a significant result with this kind of manipulation. We need to go a little bit, so there are these judgment calls, these heuristics, this expert knowledge that you get having done it time and time again. And so that's the one thing, that it's just beginner knowledge. The other thing is like you mentioned, innovation, like our computationally intensive theory construction, stuff like that. You're not going to get it to innovate on methods because you need a core understanding of research fundamentals and inference, and then you can innovate on methods. You know,
Yeah. So let me comment on 2 points there. I mean, like one, arguably, I don't like this. Like statistical knowledge is beginner knowledge, and sort of inductive, qualitative is advanced knowledge kind of distinction. And from where I'm coming from, like a really good case study is really really hard, but so is a really good experiment. Like on doing
just
either
to
of these things
correct,
is
wait, wait,
just really
I
really
just want
really
to
yeah.
I said it quickly. So his argument was not inductive theory generation. He would say that's beginner knowledge too. If we're abstracting anything to a nice pat theory, it could be exploration, exploitation. It could be TAM. It could be whatever. When we have a nice, easy theory, either qualitative or quantitative,
Okay.
that's beginner knowledge. What he said expert knowledge came from is being exposed to case after case after case. He
Yeah,
was
that
making the
one.
argument
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
for
Okay.
Harvard business cases, basically, because he's saying, look, he spent some time at Harvard and writing cases, and he goes, that's how you create an expert manager. You have them see one case, another case. You see have different company, and then you're building the complexity of the person, and then that's how they become an expert. The inductive or deductive or whatever simplistic kind of theoretical relationship he thought was beginner knowledge. So that's just to clarify that.
Okay, that's good. The other point I wanted to say, like, this is what I heard someone say. He said that in economic experiments, like difference in difference kind of studies, where reviewers push you to do more manipulation checks, more robustness checks, etc. I've heard people say that ChatGPT is kind of useful to identify other types of robustness checks that you could construe based on your variables, based on what other studies have done. Like, if you don't know what else you could put in as a variable, it could help you with that. And I see that. I see how that is possibly a thing. And I guess you could expand that also to qualitative inquiry, where it's like, I'm studying this case here, and I, have this model of the factors that are relevant. What else could be relevant? And then ChatGPT could say something like, how about culture? Culture is always important.
Yeah.
And I guess so. I don't know whether you put that under idea generation or research design, but in principle, I think at this stage, it's not as exciting, I guess, at some of the other stages, because,
well,
yeah. Let me say this. We talked about research design. Let me talk about idea generation real quick, right? So in the Sosala paper, they talk basically about opportunities for further research from one study. Like, what could be the next thing we could do, which is basically what you have in the sort of implication section in a way. Or, draw that from your limitations. Every limitation is an opportunity for further research, of course.
Yeah.
But in principle, I think that could be a thing for some fields of science. I don't think that's a big deal breaker for IS. And why? Because I always think that we are a dynamic field to begin with, right? Our phenomena change all the time. In fact, they change so rapidly that we have trouble catching up. We don't have an idea generation problem. We have a problem selection problem. We have too many problems. We have too many things we could reasonably study because we have lots of gaps everywhere. So we have to select. We don't have to identify. We have 20 options of things I could study tomorrow. And this could be quite literal. I mean, yesterday I was talking to a company and they said, well, can you help us with understanding AI's impact on, what was it, on auditing and stuff? And I was like, yeah, but I don't have the I could, but I don't have the manpower. So that's more of a problem. Which of many projects do I choose from, rather than I don't know what I should be doing tomorrow, And that could be different in other fields.
I actually think it's dangerous because the example they gave, and there's like this, they put in a paper, and I forget which paper, and they said, hey, can you tell us, right here, Wong et al. And they asked ChatGPT for perspectives that might help explain the findings, and it came up with social learning theory and technology acceptance model, which they already had, but they also added social identity theory and diffusion of responsibility. When they compared it to the research model, we found elements of So what they're saying is, hey, we can get more theoretical perspectives that we didn't think about. And in my experience as an editor, that's not what you want to do. As a researcher. Identify more theoretical perspectives that can explain your findings. My experience is that authors actually don't have a problem identifying theoretical perspectives. The problem is that they have too many theoretical perspectives often. And my job as an editor is to help them focus and say, look, don't go so broad. Go deeper into one of those perspectives. Understand what, say, social identity theory actually says, and then use that to make findings, to contribution to the people who talk about social identity theory. This whole idea of using a whole bunch of different theoretical perspectives and getting new ones, I mean, that to me is not going to help anyone get published. So on the one hand, with research design, I do think it's beginner knowledge. So it's not going to help you if you're well trained in fundamentals. It's not going to turn you into an expert into a method. It might give you some things to check on. But with idea generation, sure, it'll give you ideas, but is it giving you the ideas that are useful, or will those ideas actually make you a worse writer, depending on what you ask?
And as I said, like, it goes back to, Ron Weber wrote about this in 2003 when he said the problem, in an editorial called, I think, The Problem of the Problem. He said, like, well, we find lots of research problem, but finding a good research problem, one that is substantive, like a persistent big issue of our time, that's a different ball game. And I'm not sure it helps with that. Does it help some research opportunities? Sure. But in a field such as ours, with such a cycle of technological advance, we can always run after the next fad. And we're doing that. And so finding problems that are not transient, that are
Mhm.
actually big issues, persistent issues, spanning generations of IT or whatever, I think that's
That's
a
not
huge issue.
difficult.
I know I think that's an issue with a lot of ChatGPT research at the moment. A lot of the studies that I see, I think, are tied to the particular version of ChatGPT that the study is based on. I just recently saw a
Mm.
paper that was
Oh yeah.
based on ChatGPT 2, where ChatGPT 3 is completely different. And if you don't account for what is different, what is, persistent, whatever, what are the underlying fundamental principles, then really your research is going to be out of date in like half a year.
Yeah, dude, you're all over the place. Now you're talking about using
Yeah, I
ChatGPT.
know.
So back to the article, right?
Yeah.
We research design. Uh, I would agree, or I would argue that it may do worse. So research design is beginner knowledge, but for idea generation, it may not help much. And here's why. The first is that if you're asking it for theories, it'll just give you more theories, and getting more theories makes you a worse writer, right? Pick a theory.
Yeah.
The second thing is it will generate ideas. So I asked it to come up with a bunch of ideas for research on LLMs, and it gave me what healthcare applications, security and reliability, ethics and bias consider a whole bunch of stuff. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Under security, it told me, well, let's look at adversarial attacks and da da da. So it's like, great. What it's doing is giving me very high level ideas. And if I had no ideas in my head, I would imagine if you just asked me to come up with some ideas, I could come up with a few, but it's giving me a more thorough list. So that's fine. Uh, and then I think, and they do talk about this in the article, for idea generation, it's not a matter of I'm going to give it a prompt and it's going to give me ideas. It's more of interacting with the tool. And that's where I think it is kind of cool because with this, if I were to ask about, say, robustness and security, and it's like, tell me about the adversarial attacks, it would tell me about the adversarial attacks and then say, what's the problem? How do you do an adversarial? Then it tells me, and then I'm starting to kind of learn in this
Yeah.
way where, so I think that that's how I would use it. I wouldn't necessarily use it for research
I like
design.
it.
I wouldn't use it to come up with new theories, but I would use it as someone to talk to.
To familiarize yourself with the phenomenon, with the background, with the context,
Yeah.
with the setting. Immerse yourself. What qualitative people call immerse yourself. We go into an organization just to have a look, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
and then I could
That's a good
see
idea.
going to Google Scholar afterwards and saying, "Okay, tell me about adversarial attacks in LLMs." I'd see what actual academic research papers are there. So this, I think that's how you want to use it. You want to use it as an actual chat tool where it doesn't just do your work of your prompt, but you go back and forth, you learn a little, and then based on that learning, you go to Google Scholar and you find the articles that are about, say, adversarial attacks on LLMs, right? And then you get yourself up to speed on that, see if there's right. So I think it's useful, but again, it's not going to take care of the research for you, but it'll get you
Okay.
started perhaps, right?
All right, Nick, let's move on to that next phase. In that article, their next phase is data collection and analysis, right? And I think this is where it gets a little bit more interesting and also a little bit more trickier. I think there are some, let's call them shortcuts. It looks like it could give you shortcuts, which are dangerous and, sometimes could be outright unethical. And I do think there are some really interesting ideas, so I'm going now beyond what they talk about. They give some examples. But we recently just, last week we had a paper out, which is on patent data, right? So sort of econometric in a way, like what you usually do in this type of research is you grab patent data from Google Patent in our case, and then you try to match that data, a couple of million patents, to firm level data from CompuStat, and in our case, from the Wharton Diamond database. Like they got this curated database about all sorts of firm data. And that's actually difficult to do because, you have an issue between firm names here and firm names there. One of the issues, you don't have a unique identifier. Firms for patents often use subsidiary firms as assignees. So it might not be patented under Microsoft or something, right? And you need to do this. We did this through a fuzzy name matching algorithm, basically an algorithm that compares terms based on the similarity, and then you have to manually check that, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm saying is in this type of data, the regressions later, they run overnight, literally, right? The biggest amount of work is in getting these three sets of data into one database. That's a
Yeah.
lot of effort and, validating, checking that. And I do think ChatGPT could do this with code interpreter, with an
Yeah.
add-on, they can do that in a flash, and that could be super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it'll generate simulation data for you. It'll
Yeah.
generate data and it'll make But here's the deal. I was just talking to someone from Google yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he was telling me about some of the data plans for Google and how they're, productizing data. And you mentioned their patent data, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. They're going to get to the point where they're doing these things, these big queries across all their data sets, right? They want to get NASDAQ. They want to get like CompuStat. They want to, so all these people will be there, all these different data sets. And when you ask it something, it will draw from the different data sets and create that data set for you, right? So that's the direction
Yeah.
they're going. So I think ChatGPT is there and it can do it a bit, but it's kind of a stopgap. I think we're going to have a lot of options for automatically and validly integrating these data sets in such a way. Because I think the biggest weakness of ChatGPT is the non-verifiability, right? The issue
Yes.
that, you did it and it's great, but then you have to do it manually, like I with the topic modeling and some of these analysis techniques, people have to then do it again and validate it. And I guess with topic modeling and
Yeah.
uh, LSA kind of stuff, I think you can. It's pretty good. I think people have validated it and they like the output, but there are certain you need to manually, like with your data set, you had to manually validate it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We looked at a few of the name matching that they did, and then we verified that that was in fact, a subsidiary of Microsoft, a subsidiary of Apple, or whatever it was, right? And then
Yeah.
once we had a threshold, say 90%, we would say like that's good enough, right? That's usually how we do it. But you're right. I mean, it reminds me of this a paper that I really really like by Heng Zhu. She wrote this paper in 2020 about validity problems in digital trace data, and I think you can extend that to data generated by ChatGPT and other types of generative AI. Because she talks about, what you said, non-verifiability or opacity. You just don't see underneath it. You don't know where it's coming from, right? We've heard now that ChatGPT can also hallucinate. It can make up data and make up text, make up other things. And it's really, really difficult to prove. And I wrote down in my notes here that even 10 years ago, when we looked at topic modeling, computational topic modeling, text analysis and figuring out what is this text about, we had the issue in the review process that they said, well, how reliable it is. Can you do it again? And you couldn't reproduce our own results because these things are also in a way generative. They generated on the
Yeah.
dot. And then what
Yeah.
we did back then, we had a tool called Leximancer. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
a university developed tool. University of Queensland developed it. Topic modeling tool. And we went to them and said, like, guys, we need some more. Can you tell us the algorithm in a little bit more detail? Because we want to respond to these review comments. And they said, nah, sorry, this is classified. It's commercial IP and whatnot. So this is an actual issue. And that's something we have to deal with even more. Not only hallucination, but also the fact that whether or not it has hallucinate, you don't even know without extensive checking, where it's reasonably to assume that you won't be able to do it in the future.
Right. Yeah, and these hallucinations are a big issue, right? And I know right when ChatGPT came out, I remember a couple of people like even posted videos saying, "Look, it'll write your lit review for you," and then very
Yeah.
quickly, people pointed out, "Look, those citations are not real.
Yeah,
Those aren't
exactly. I
actually
remember that.
the right." And then so we're still at the point where the citations are not real, although they're starting to put real citations in there. So if you ask it for real references, you'll actually get a few that are.
They
So they're
look really
doing
good.
something. Well, not only do they look really good and they're real journals and they're real authors, they're just not put together. You'll get a
Exactly.
title, and the title of the article will not be for those authors in that journal, but it's a real article. But now it's getting to the point where you get whatever 5 citations, 5 references. 2 of them are actually real references, actually referencing
Yeah.
real things with the right authors, with the right everything. And then 3 of them are some sort of hallucination. And that's the issue, that it makes you think that what it's doing. And they talk about this in the article where they said, okay, what are the top MIS journals, for example? And it gives you the top 4 is the top 4: ISR, MISQ, JAIS, JMIS. And then the rest of I guess the old basket, it only puts a couple of the, like Aegis and JIT maybe are there. And then it gives a bunch of other, like it might not include the entire old basket. So if we buy that the basket is indeed the top journals, then that's not what the
Yeah.
top 10 are. So it probably uses impact factors or something
I
else.
I I wanted to talk about this literature review thing a bit because I sent it to you yesterday. There's a Nature survey of postdocs, and they asked them what do you use ChatGPT for, and unsurprising, most of them use it for writing. And I think the second biggest use case for them, and it was a quite a substantial share of people reporting that was literature reviews. And my immediate reaction, I want to probe that with you. My immediate reaction is, oh my God, don't do that. That's a stupid idea. Like to have a tool review, summarize, whatever, review the literature for you, whether to summarize it, whether to create a table or whatever, whatever sense you're doing. I don't think that's going to help you because to me, to me, the point of the literature review is for you to know what we know. And I can't have a tool do that for me. Like I maybe I'm wrong or old fashioned or something, but I don't think that's how it works. You can't possibly contribute to the literature if you yourself don't know what the conversation is, what has been said, what has been done, what the assumptions are, whatever. Yes, of course I believe I can get ChatGPT to write a literature review section of a paper, sure. But that doesn't mean that I get it. And so that means I haven't actually learned anything. Am I wrong here? I think that's a very dangerous use of ChatGPT, to be honest.
Well, and the big issue is you don't know what you're missing. So it may actually, on the face, be pretty accurate, for example, right? It's not going to be at the level of depth that you need, like you're saying. You need to know the literature and you need to problematize it and frame an argument. And you're going to send it to expert reviewers. If you go to ISR or MISQ, those people know that literature. And they'll catch you out. They'll point out. Now, if you're going to other journals, like there are millions of journals out there, and not all of them have as rigorous a process. They may not. You might get away with it, and you might get published. That's fine. I don't know. Is that quality work? Probably not.
But you're talking about publishing. Like I'm talking about really like sort of like an ideal, a romantic view of an academic that learns things or knows things or whatever, or thinks about things. And that, if you forget about the pressure to publish for a second, then I think it's really detrimental. It's really not a good idea.
I think you're right. So that's are you a decent human being? So here's the deal. There are people cheating all over the place. There are people faking their data. There are people taking shortcuts with their research, and it's because of the pressure to publish. That's horrible. That goes against the academic enterprise. That's unethical. That we should do a podcast on ethics because I taught my PhD students ethics. We're going to do this in the future.
We can do that, yeah.
And I got really excited. But here's the deal. It's so you're absolutely right. That goes against. If you have pride of craftsmanship, if you're an actual scholar and a researcher in a field that knows something, you don't take shortcuts. You need to know it in depth, period. So then ChatGPT offers you nothing. You're an expert. You know better than ChatGPT. Why would it help you, right? Now, could it start you down a course? And can you then use some of the text it generated as your own? I don't like that idea, but that's where it gets fuzzy, right?
I mean, yeah, exactly. It does get fuzzy, and don't want to come across as saying like, don't use it at all or something like this. I even think it could actually help you in, I guess, finding a nice representation for reviewing the literature that could actually end up in a paper. I'm just saying it shouldn't lead you away from the fact for you to understand a domain, a theory, a conversation, or whatever, you still need to read. It's one thing to know that RBV comes from Jay Barney, but if you want to continue, you need to read this stuff, right? So you got to understand the little arguments so you can know how to problematize maybe one of them. Having said that, so here's an idea where I think it could be really a game changer in meta-analysis. Think about it. So at the moment, one of the big movements in meta-analysis and management that I really like is this initiative called MetaBus. I think it's a platform, an online tool that someone developed to help people doing more meta-analysis. And meta-analysis are like quantitative statistical, and they're awesome. Yeah, but they're hard to do. You have to go through each individual study, find the exact 7 statistical coefficient, put them in, and then run the new regressions. Now imagine a tool similar to my patent data example. Imagine a tool that does this like that. Now that would be awesome. You want to figure out a meta-analysis of the 27 factors that really matter to technology adoption? Wouldn't it be cool to have a really cool script or prompt for that? That would be so good.
Well, Abbasi and Kai Larson and their collaborators came up with this theory on paper a few years ago. I think
I remember that.
And they're kind of doing that. They were doing that with the big issue with that sort of meta-analysis is that you need constructs that are fairly related, and then you can do that, right? But you need a high paradigm field, similar methodology. you need to go back in. So you could do that in medicine. You can do that in psychology, perhaps. It's hard in IS because you're only
You're
going to
right.
get one type of each study per. That's why we don't have a lot of meta-analyses in IS because people are doing all these different things, and it's hard. There's no. You could have with TAM, I guess, but no one needed to do that, right?
Okay, let me flag another idea. Like I agree with you. I think it's cool and again, it like really helpful for that and maybe
Yeah,
not for AS but other fields, right?
yeah,
A different idea that I thought about is actually based on my experience with Leximancer all these years ago, which is a tool to, topic modeling of text, right? So,
yeah.
the classic example of that was actually Romeo and Juliet. What's it about? Well, love and family and blah. Um, in a way, ChatGPT is the same. So I was thinking, well, would that help qualitative researchers at least with open coding? This manual process where you go through 40 interviews and generate 3,000 codes and then aggregate that into, let's say, 25 categories or something. Like some of that stuff is creative, I guess, and interpretive, whatever. But there's also a lot of manual, just kind of laborious work involved in that. And I wonder if that's not a shortcut, so to say, not in a negative way, where it could actually be useful. I haven't tried it out. I don't know. But it would be worth
Yeah.
exploring, no?
Well, I don't know. It depends how you do qualitative, right? So the paradigms range from, fairly positivist, objectivist, kind of, and then if you have certain codes that you want and you want it to go find excerpts that have something to do with these codes, I think it probably, I don't know, I've never tried it. It could probably do that. If you're if you're leaning more on the constructionist side, interpretivist side, right? It's all about everyone knows you can have 30 different interpretations of the same data set, right? So it's not about interpreting it's about constructing an explanation. And it's like, I know from my own qualitative work, because so I lean on the constructionist side, right? I go that direction. But to me, there ends up being one or two interviews you have or things you observe that really motivate things, and then that motivates you to collect data in that direction. It motivates you to look for data in that, you tell the story in that direction, in that interesting
I
direction. I
get
think you'll
that.
get a lot of boring crap if all you do is say open code it for me.
I get that, but just to give you a counter example, we do firm level research, as you know, and we've been doing quite a bit of multi-case firm level research. So with theoretical, like with careful sampling of the cases based on some theoretical replication logic, like this firm that we talked to should be similar to this firm, and this should be particularly dissimilar or something, right? So,
Hmm.
imagine we have 4 cases. And then you have to do some pretty thorough cross-case analysis, like, do we, whatever happens here also happens here, blah, 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 based on expectations. So that's fairly deductive. It's not very interpretive constructionist, but rather really it's a pattern matching logic. I haven't tried this, but I do think in some of the genres, it could be not a game changer, but it could be like the next version of a good qualitative analysis tool, like with a little bit of an
Yeah.
oomph behind it. I do think that's a possibility worth exploring for someone that has more time than me to go and figure out if that works.
Yeah, and in the article they do talk about pattern matching, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things it's good at. You show it something, code that thing, and then show it a few others and say, now code these like it, right? And it would do that. And with case studies, especially if it's like published articles about cases or something, like if you were studying Harvard business cases or something like that, then it would probably work. If you're interviewing and if you're generating original data, you just have to make sure that what you're doing is similar each time, right? You
Well,
follow a
but
rubric, you
again,
do
but in
something like
good
that,
in good
right? Yeah.
cross case study work, you would
Yeah,
try to get similar informants. You ask them
right.
fairly similar, quite like you would
Yeah.
try to actually mean it when we say replication logic, and that
Hmm.
so the outputs are comparable, right? So I talked to a CIO here and a CIO there, and ask them the same question, and then I can have a
Yeah,
look, presumably to comparing the answers, right?
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should try it. Let's do that. Show me that data set. Let's play with it and see what happens. Do you have that?
Yeah, I mean, like it would be an interesting case study of sorts, right? I give you my data, my original primary case data, and then maybe even my interpretation, and ask you to come up with an alternative one. Surely someone has done that by now, no? Like
Yeah, I
here's my
don't know.
data.
I
I
haven't.
don't know.
All right. So what did we? So yeah, I think we've hit a lot of these topics that were in this paper. What did we miss so far? I think we missed a lot of the limitations, but these are the main limitations. I mean, to me, the biggest issues are number one, beginner knowledge. Number two, hallucinations. So you need
Yeah.
to validate. And then number three, it's incomplete. It'll give you something, but it's not going to be so those are like the three issues, right? Verifiability, validation, hallucinations, which I guess are related, and then incomplete
I
information.
agree on all three. I'll give you two more. One
Hmm.
is I don't know what the right noun is. The adjective is transient nature. Like,
Yeah,
the fact that you're studying something based on a model that is being updated. The current version, as you said earlier, 3.5 is based from September 2021 or whatever. I think if you pay, you can get GPT-4, and at some stage they'll update the large language model, and then it'll be different. These things
yeah,
evolve and they'll be different, which I think puts the burden on the researcher to pick something that is not germane to whatever transient version of ChatGPT you've just been using. Because if so, it won't hold, right? It won't be replicable or even reproducible in half a year's time. And that's an issue whenever you used any type of software tool. Like, oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I can't actually do this anymore because the software, I don't know, is the provider went bankrupt, or I can't, the new version doesn't compute it in the
that's
same
true.
way anymore, stuff like
Yeah,
this. So I think that's another issue, and it's not the hallucination or verifiability or incompleteness problem. And the fifth issue, which cuts across all of this, is, of course, scientific ethics.
yeah,
Like, who's accountable and who's responsible to whatever you're doing or whatever stage of the research process, with or without ChatGPT, right? So sort of like
yeah,
the principle of falsifiability, source appropriation, precision, honest reporting, classical scientific ethics.
yeah,
And they're like, again, challenge me on this one. I think there's no difference in kind. These principles still hold. You're still responsible for all of them, whether or not you choose to use ChatGPT. And I think people need to be aware of this. I think the issue is heightened. Source appropriation, say, is a
yeah,
heightened issue, because if you don't do fact checking or citation checking of text that's generated by ChatGPT, then you're at fault. But just as much as it's always been your task of
yeah,
checking that the citations you put at the end of a sentence are in fact appropriate and correct, and whatever else. So
yeah,
I don't think there's a difference in kind, but I do think these issues, like ChatGPT, brings it to the forefront. And the issue there, I think, and then I'm stopping with my monologue here, is that yes, we have one system of ethics for the entire academic enterprise, but how do I put this? Different people in different regions, different nations, different cultural settings place different values on each of these ethics. So sort of like
hmm.
honest reporting means different things to different people around the planet, even if we all agree on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's yeah. So people in East Asia
That's
back
what I
in the day
said.
had different views of plagiarism than people in say Western Europe or whatever. That's been dealt with, right? That's not the case. Everyone knows what plagiarism is now. We're all in the same exact research enterprise, and there are two things that are fundamental to the research enterprise. And if you're not doing these two things, then you're not a researcher, right? You're some sort of charlatan that's just getting publications and doing whatever, right? The one is you're honest. Honesty is totally at the core of the research enterprise. And I think that's how you deal with ChatGPT. However you use it, I think you have to be honest,
Yeah.
plain and simple. And you can't, and by putting its text in your paper, you're essentially saying, this is my writing when it's in your paper. And if you can honestly say, this is my writing, then I think you're fine. And if you wrote it and had ChatGPT edit it, I think you can say that.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so too.
so the first thing, and if you're using it to analyze, just say how you're analyzing it, and the reviewers will tell you whether they buy it or not, and try and validate it. So the trick to ChatGPT in the research endeavor is to be honest. The second fundamental part of our trade, our craft, right? And this fits the honesty, is that we are supposed to be knowledgeable, aren't we? It's not about you, Recker, are not about your research papers. You're about you. The University of Hamburg hired you as the nucleus professor because you're supposed to know something. They didn't hire you because you wrote some
Paper.
article in
Exactly. You're right. You're right.
BPMJ, right? So if you don't know what it is you're doing and writing, and this actually concerns me with a lot of senior professors, is that especially if they're the kind who have the labs with the big teams and they put their names on the end, They don't actually know any of those things. It's their students, it's their postdocs that knew it, and they don't. Well, then they're charlatans as far as I'm concerned, right? I think you need to, number one, be honest in all your research endeavors, and then you can use ChatGPT. Number two, you have to know it because that's why
I like that.
University of Hamburg, University of Notre Dame, it's about you and your knowledge and your expert knowledge. The reason you are the nucleus professor is that you are an expert. If you are not an expert, then you're a charlatan. I think you should be an expert and if become that expert. And the only way you're going to do that is by knowing what you read, knowing what you do, knowing what your students do, knowing what your postdocs do. There is one thing I did want to point out, and it fits that whole craft of who you are as a professor. And they have this in the article. They have the critique by ChatGPT of a qualitative study, right? And the critiques are lame. They're like the crap you get at a bad conference, right? It's like you use a convenience sample so it limits generalizability. Just these really weak,
Yeah.
sort of lame. If you use ChatGPT to do your review, then yes, you've mailed in your review, you checked the box, and it's the same crappy review other people. And they even point out in the article, senior editors are going to see that and know it's a crappy review. But there again, this is your craft. You're part of a community. If you get asked to review a paper and you agree to do it, because you're an expert, you should use your expertise to review it. I think if you're using ChatGPT to even help with the review, to write the initial, I think you're just, it's pathetic. Don't look yourself in the mirror.
I love it. I love it. You put much more eloquently something that I wanted to say. I'll try to put in my own words in a second. But you're right. Like, especially on that last point, in some of the systems that I know from back in the day, I hope that changed by now. It's the same as if you're a professor and I ask you to do a review and you let one of your students do it in your name, you're a bad person. Simple. So yeah, anyway, so I think that's what you mean. Like the way that I would have put it is, I couldn't quite put it as eloquently as you, but I think to me, well, science really is a very manual is the way that I put it. Activity, it's like, it's my knowledge, my ideas, mine, and I can't automate that away. It's
it's personal.
It's personal.
Science
exactly, right?
is personal.
And it's a trust-based enterprise. Think about it. Like, we write something down and people that read it trust that's what we've been doing. They trust that the documentation of our research process and outcomes is a faithful representation of what we've done and what we found. And we trust, the reviewers trust us, the editors trust us. So if you ask me, did you get ethical clearance? We usually say, yeah, we did. Okay, I trust you. Did you generate this data and did you do another experiment? Yeah, okay. Like everything works on trust, which obviously only works if we believe in this principle of honesty. If we don't do that, everything falls apart. Everything falls apart, right? Yeah. And we have some institutions, of course, that we need because, of course, not everyone is honest all the time, and sometimes trust gets violated and stuff like this. But of course, if that's really what you're doing, you're really in the wrong profession.
Yeah, you're in the right. And it's a profession, it's a craft, and it's based on expertise. And if you're not an expert in the things you're, and we all have we know there are better experts than us at literally everything, right? So that's fine. You don't have to be the foremost expert, but you have to take that as a challenge and be as expert as you can. And I think,
but so also we mentioned this a little bit in passing, but maybe just to highlight it at the end of this episode. As I said, I'm a slow adopter. I think I've been relatively critical about some of the usage in the enterprise of ChatGPT today. But I want to say, like, I think the only way we could move forward is go and explore what's possible. Do play, do explore, do research on this. Let's figure it out. Just be honest about it. Like, because you said this as well. I think as an editor or a reviewer or whatever, I think it would be completely fine if I see a paper or someone like, look, here's the research idea which we generate with ChatGPT. If we're very honest about it, then I, in principle, don't really see a reason to say, this paper should be rejected, whatever, if it's still a good contribution to knowledge by someone that's knowledgeable and did everything honestly. Why not use ChatGPT, right? So I don't want to say anything like don't use it, but be honest about it, but also go and explore it. Like, go and explore the possibilities and the limits.
Yeah. So we emphasize the ethical end. We gave people a way out. And I guess my whole takeaway from this little reading their article and my various endeavors of playing with ChatGPT is that it's beginner knowledge. In general, it'll do some pattern matching and some big analysis for us, but in general, if you're not an expert, it's not going to give you or fool anyone that you're an expert. You have to be the expert yourself.
See,
So that's
I wanted to ask you this at the end, like, because as I said, I haven't really used it, and right with you doodling around just now, you've used it more than I have, and even
Hmm.
after talking with you about it, I don't see myself using it in the near future, or even exploring the research opportunities. Like I don't know, I don't feel too. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
I just
I think,
won't.
well, there again, as an expert, as the professor, you have to. It's your job to
Yeah,
spend
sure,
time
sure.
in it. I think so. That's kind of where I look at it. The very first thing I used it for, Wrecker, was I had a student. He was from India, and he needed a visa recommendation letter. So
Oh,
I think he was on. It was a former student from like 10 years ago, and he's in the world. He's like an executive somewhere, but he needed something for his green card, some professional attestation. So I took his a couple bits of information. I didn't put his whole CV in there or anything, but I just said, okay, here's someone. This is the title. This is whatever. Write a visa attestation letter, and it wrote a really nice one. And then I just put in the guy's name and did a couple of things and used that as my recommendation letter.
okay.
So it'll
So
through.
that's like a productivity improvement use case.
Yeah. So writing short letters, coding, a lot of people I know. So I actually did this with my students. These were executives and I taught them queries. So select from where, right? And I gave them little challenges and I had this little editor where they're playing around because I wanted them to not be afraid of what a query is. And then I had them go to ChatGPT and said, now have ChatGPT come up with that query. Now do this. And then ChatGPT made a very long, convoluted query for something that was fairly simple. And, it's like one of these things where if you were, they didn't know because they weren't experts, right? But anybody who's done a query or did it for a living would know exactly. And it's the same with programming. It'll write really inefficient, silly code that actually gets it done. But anybody who knows Python is going to look at that and go, I could have done this in 4 lines, and this
Oh,
is
of
kind of
course. Yeah.
so.
And the same holds for scholarship, right? So maybe some of the biggest knowledge experts, they don't have anything to gain. But you also got to remember there's a lot of people that have that, what do you call beginner knowledge? Like maybe they don't have the
Mm,
best training. So maybe it helps them with their research design or their idea formulation or whatever else. So
yeah.
maybe one more reason why I personally am not going to study ChatGPT. I know this is not about using ChatGPT for research, but even as an object of research, the reality is that I try to stay away from topics that where I think that a lot of people are studying that because then I feel too much placed in a competition, right? So I think a lot of people are
Well,
doing
see, you're too
experiment with
competitive.
ChatGPT. Yeah,
I always think that I think differently than other people. So even if I hit a crowded space, I'll probably come up with some different view on it.
no,
That's what I
really?
think.
Oh,
Yeah, it would like,
I don't see it.
uh,
I see everyone doing an experiment on here's a human or a group of humans. Here's a group of humans that uses ChatGPT, and then there's I don't know maybe a third group, and they're all doing problem solving and figuring out which constellation is better in problem solving. That's the one thing I don't want to do because
well,
that
we
sounds
beat
like a
up
lot
on
of
Tam.
work. Yeah,
We beat up on Tam in past episodes, right? Where we're like, all right, perceived usefulness and ease of use in 1988. And Fred Davis said everything you needed to say. And then there was like 15 years of research on it, basically saying the same thing. So we beat up on that. And
we
we,
didn't really beat up on that.
we kind of did a year or so ago. And, but the good thing about TAM is, well, you know what it did is it trained generation after generation of researcher on how to do structural equation modeling, how to think
Fair
about
enough.
constructs, how to. So actually, that's what I would say about now with these experiments around ChatGPT. With our PhD students, all our PhD students are doing these algorithmic aversion. So it's studies. It's a good way to learn the research enterprise to start something that is well trodden and just find your little niche, extend it. And
I like that. Actually, you know what? That's a good counter argument to what I said. Yeah, I like it.
yeah. So anyway, that's what we should talk about next time, though. We should talk about researching ChatGPT. We this time we talked about research, ChatGPT in research.
Yeah,
Now we should talk because it is the biggest issue in industry. So let's talk
it
about
is.
that. What are the boring questions you can ask? Because we're not going to, information systems is not going to do prompt engineering, right? Things change too quickly and whatever. But, or maybe we will. Well, let's talk
Maybe
about that.
we'll. Well, let's talk about that. I like that. We'll do that as a separate episode. ChatGPT as the object of study or something. I wonder if we come up with some better ideas that other people have. All right,
We'll
sweet.
see.
Nick, for you in California, do open your blinds, let the sunlight in, and like you're
Yeah.
sitting in
The
this
sun
dark
is not even
room.
up yet, dude. Yeah. You make me get up early in the morning. All right.
Well, I do have some power. I am the alpha male after all.
See, just look at the camera and smile, Wrecker.